Hey guys, I want to talk about a topic I hear come up quite often. I think it's a pretty straightforward concept, but others have confusion and disagreement about it, and that has to do with the fighter's prime years. Some contend that there is no prime years, that the entire career of a fighter should be judged equally. So if you defeat Muhammad Ali at the end of his career, you should get just as much credit as somebody who did it earlier in his career. Others say no, there is certain years in a fighter's career where they're clearly at the peak of their abilities, physically, mentally, and skill wise. And therefore, if you beat someone who is far removed from that period of time, then you shouldn't get as much credit as you would have if you beat them in the peak years. And this is rather important when you're judging a career at its end, and judging the quality of a win. So I side with the latter. I do think that there is such thing as a prime year in the fighter's career, and therefore a win or loss inside or outside of that prime period is either more important or less important. Um, so there's a couple of things I want to talk about and give some examples. And I also want to talk about age and the factors that go into making a prime years or not. Now, a lot of people talk about this when it comes to Mike Tyson. I think that's where most of the arguments take place because people always talk about the prime years of Mike Tyson and he was untouchable. No one would have beat him in his prime years. And some people use that as a way to kind of discredit the victories of Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, and others. And maybe even Buster Douglas. So yeah, we should talk about that and see what all that means. Now, first, I want to give some examples. To me, it's pretty straightforward. Muhammad Ali in 1964 beating Sonny Liston and then later losing to Joe Frazier a little bit. He was a little bit outside of his peak years, but still pretty much at the top of his game in 1971 when he lost to Joe Frazier. Now, Joe Frazier should get tremendous credit for that victory. No one defeated Muhammad Ali at that point. He went on to have several excellent wins after that. But when you get to the end of his career in 1980 something, when he lost to Larry Holmes, as great as Larry is, when you examine Larry's career, that really shouldn't count as giving Larry a lot of credit. I mean, Muhammad Ali was a shell of himself. And it's not just about age. You can see the physical abilities were eroded. The speed, the mobility, the reflexes, everything was diminished. The physical conditioning, everything was diminished at that point. And, you can pick any fighter's career and see the same thing. One of my favorite fighters is Shane Mosley. And there's different reasons for why a fighter is no longer in their peak. But when you look at the film and you see clearly there are some fights and years where a fighter is at the best of their ability, and then as their skills erode, and then you can clearly see that how they perform. And it's not just the other fighters' performance that affected that. It's within themselves. It's their own skill has eroded. Shane Mosley, one of my favorite fighters, this is an example you can use. Prior to Vernon Forrest, when he fought Oscar De La Hoya, when he was at a lightweight, blowing through competition, he looked tremendous. Now, I don't think it was so much age, but something happened in the Vernon Forrest fight. I don't think mentally he was ever the same. He started to fall in love with his power. He would throw one at a time power shots when he used to throw combinations. So it was a mental thing more with Shane Mosley than a physical thing. And then eventually became a physical thing as well. So there's different reasons why fighters peak, and when they peak. It's not always age. I hear a lot of people say that as well. They talk about Lennox Lewis defeating Mike Tyson. Now, I want to say that Evander Holyfield gets a lot of credit for beating Mike Tyson because Mike was closer to his prime. Buster Douglas probably beat a prime Mike Tyson. But Lennox Lewis, come on, let's be honest. Lennox Lewis was a great fighter, but Mike Tyson was a shell of himself. I mean, the guy was stuck in mud. He was overweight. He just looked like a walking zombie. I mean, I don't understand why he gets much credit for that, Lennox Lewis. You just have to look at the performance, and you can clearly see the skills are eroded. So as Lennox Lewis doesn't get as much credit for that victory. He should not. And people point out sometimes that, hey, Lennox was older than Mike Tyson. Well, this goes back into what I was saying before. Age is really not much of a factor when it comes to prime. For some people, obviously it is, but others it is not. It varies. Lennox Lewis was in his prime at an older age. Mike Tyson was at his prime at a younger age. If Lennox Lewis fought Mike Tyson in 1990, Mike Tyson probably would have destroyed him. But when he did fight him, Lennox Lewis destroyed him. So they were at their peaks at different times and different ages. And you can look at many, many examples. Fernando Vargas in his early 20s was at his peak. And then once he reached like 26, 27, he was never the same. Someone like Bernard Hopkins at 25, 24, I mean, was he even fighting at that time? I don't remember. But he was clearly still developing. He didn't have much of an amateur background, which also plays a big role in when you reach your peak. And at the same time, in the early 1993, when he fought, I think it was 93, when he fought Roy Jones was at his peak, and he beat Bernard pretty convincingly. And then you look at later on in their career, Bernard started to get better and better, and Roy Jones started to decrease in skill and in ability. And then they fought later on, and Bernard beat him. So, and Bernard was always older than Roy. So age is just a number in that way. So anyway, those are some of the things I wanted to talk about. Clearly, there are prime years, and you cannot judge a fighter for losing when he's just a shell of himself. Now, you got to give credit to fighters who sustain a longer period of time when they are in their prime. And you have to basically end up saying, what did they achieve while they were at their best? So there you go, guys. That's what I think about that. Bye.